Hello, and welcome to our webinar today, focused on improving allyship to the BI+ community. I'm Noreen Daniel, the Enterprise Outcomes Committee Chair for Wells Fargo's Pride Employee Resource Group. I identify as a cisgender female, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm also a proud ally to my son and my sister, both of whom identify as BI+, and to the broader LGBTQ community. As I mentioned, we are here to focus on the BI+ community and how we can all be better allies. Bi erasure and biphobia are both prevalent and harmful to the BI+ community, though many may be unaware of the impact, or perhaps unaware of their own participation in minimizing this identity group. Our goal today is to help bring greater understanding of the community and their experience, and support a broader inclusion in your future ERG programming and events. We challenge you to lean in, recognize your own personal bias, reflect on your personal response to the information that's being shared, and take actionable steps to be more inclusive. Let's start with considering this image just to get your mind flowing. Full transparency here, when I first looked at this image as we were initially reviewing the deck design, I saw a lesbian couple, as many of you may have. I made the mistake of defining the couple's identity or the individuals involved in the apparent couple based on their external feminine gender expression only. And I failed to acknowledge that potentially one, or possibly even both, of the individuals shown could also identify as bi. So we have an aha moment, and we're just getting started. Before we dive in too deeply, we did want to establish some ground rules first, in the effort to ensure a safe and respectful environment for all of us. We'll be candid and transparent with our experiences and hope the material is received with both respect and inclusivity. Thank you for keeping an open mind and for challenging your own potential biases throughout the presentation. With this presentation, we'll be seeking your engagement and response. So please feel free to use the chat area to ask questions, share observations, and your response to the content being shared. Thank you in advance for keeping these ground rules and commitments in mind throughout the session. I briefly touched on my identity earlier. I work for Wells Fargo as a marketing production leader, and I'm also the Enterprise Outcomes Committee Chair for our Pride ERG. I'm a proud ally mom and sister. Ryan, can you please tell us a bit about yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Noreen, and thank you everyone for attending our session. My name is Ryan Rosa. I am a business support consultant at Wells Fargo, so that's a very generic title for a project manager. I am the Pride ERG Enterprise Workforce Outcomes Chair. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs. I identify as bi+, and I identify as gender fluid. Matt, would you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Ryan. My name is Matt Fleming with Northwestern Mutual. I'm Senior Director of Product Sales Support in our distribution services area, and our teams provide pre-sale consulting to advisors on all of our products, insurance, and investments. Currently Vice Chair of our Pride ERG, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. I identify as bi+ and am cisgender male. Candace?
Hey everyone, good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Candace Todd and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a business initiatives consultant on the Wells Fargo Enterprise Business Process Management team. In that role, I support change management, communications, and strategic planning. I am also the Workforce Outcomes Chair of the Pride Charlotte chapter, which is the largest Pride chapter at Wells Fargo. In that role, I support bi+ and trans awareness, education, and advocacy. It's an honor to be with you today. I'll pass to Laura.
Hello, my name is Laura Martin, and I am with Northwestern Mutual. I'm a program support manager in our distribution services department. I'm a member at large of our Pride ERG and am grateful for the opportunity to be here with you today. I identify as bi+ and am a cisgendered woman. I'm going to pass it over to Matt to start our webinar. Matt, you're muted.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Just to set the stage, before we can discuss biphobia and bi-erasure, it's important that we level set a little bit on what we mean when we reference bi plus or the bisexual community itself. We need to be clear about what it is as everyone learns about how to interact with and support the affinities. So let's define it, discuss some statistics relevant to the community, and then get into the true impacts of negative perception or treatment that we may feel as bi plus individuals. And so as we define bi plus, and you think about the LGBT community overall, you might ask, where do we fit? You're familiar with many of the aspects of how we as LGBTQ plus individuals define ourselves: biological sex versus gender identity, orientation, gender expression, and varying degrees of romantic, emotional, and sexual attraction. Those things present a framework for expressing individuality within the community. In this case, bisexuality at its simplest, you can see here, non-monosexual people non-monosexual people with the capacity to be attracted to more than one or any gender. And that said, the definition comes with some specific things to consider. Many people in the bi plus community feel that the term bisexual leads to more objectification based on the inclusion of sexual in the name, and as opposed to the lesbian and gay identities. Bi plus is more expansive, fully inclusive. It's a fully inclusive umbrella term which includes broader identities: bi, pan, omnisexual, and others. Throughout the presentation, you'll see references to both. And now I'll pass to Candace.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. So if definitions aren't your style, here is a fantastic quote from a longtime champion of the bi plus community, Robin Oakes. So Robin says, "I call myself bisexual because I acknowledge that I have in myself the potential to be attracted romantically and or sexually to people of more than one gender, not necessarily at the same time, not necessarily in the same way, and not necessarily to the same degree." Now, I love this quote for a lot of reasons, but most especially because of its inclusivity. She speaks about the potential to be attracted, and romantically and or sexually. It does not have to be both. Also, how that attraction can differ in its dimensions. We thank Robin for allowing us to use her quote today. We also encourage you to check out her Twitter feed, follow her on social media, and also to look at her published works. Again, she's just a true champion of the community. She's also speaking at this year's summit, and we hope that you have signed up for one or more of her events. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. And again, I'm Candace Todd, and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I do identify as a bi plus cisgender woman. And I am here today because of the power of active allyship. I grew up poor in a blue-collar home in rural Washington state. My family lived in a double-wide 800-square-foot trailer for most of my childhood. My dad's an alcoholic, and my mom turned to the church for support when I was about 7 years old. And we very quickly became a core part of a small Southern Baptist congregation. And my entire childhood was rooted in the binary: heaven and hell, right and wrong, man and woman, and most of all, conservative and liberal. So conservative, actually, that my parents recently got rid of cable because they thought that Fox News was becoming too liberal. Just let that sink in for a second. So that's the tree that I fell from. And when I fell, I rolled about as far away as physically possible. So I realized that I was attracted to more than one gender when I was in college. I remember the moment as if it was yesterday at a small concert of an up-and-coming LGBTQ artist named Brandi Carlile. And the ticket was only $8, and I am confident that that is the best $8 that I have ever spent. At that concert, I saw two female presenting folks, hand in hand in the front row. And I was so drawn to them immediately and their energy, and a wave of comfort fell over me. I didn't understand it then, but I felt safe and I felt at home. Years later, in my 20s, I began dating a lesbian woman. Now, she joked that she liked to date straight women because she was a glutton for punishment. And I didn't consider myself exactly straight, but I didn't consider myself to be a lesbian either. So I thought I must be bi. And I told her that, and she told me that being bisexual wasn't real, that eventually I would have to choose. And she didn't say this to hurt me. She said it because that was her truth. And that's how she saw the world. But that was my first experience with bi erasure. Now, at the time, I lived with a charming, animated, very opinionated gay man whom I love very dearly. He had a very loud opinion of this situation, and he also adored my girlfriend very much. And he told me I was going to break her heart because I was using her to get over a hard relationship, that I didn't know what I was, who I was attracted to, that I should leave her alone, and that as soon as another guy came around that I could tolerate, that I would move on and leave her brokenhearted. Basically, that I couldn't be trusted. And that was my first experience with biphobia. And I wish I could say that it ended there, but these exchanges pretty much repeated themselves with almost everyone who I came out to. And I felt invalid. I felt irresponsible, untrustworthy, and depressed. It was a really hard time. Now, things turned around for me when a friend of mine attended the 2018 Out and Equal Summit. So before I knew of Out and Equal was impacting me. She took what she learned back to our Pride ERG, where she was the ally chair of our local chapter where I was a member. She asked me to help her put together a little presentation about something that I had never heard about, bi erasure and biphobia. And with that one simple ask and that act of allyship, my world changed. I began to understand myself, to accept myself, and claim my own space. I am honored to be here today. I hope that the information that we share with you will help you and those in your ERG find themselves as well. Now I'm going to pass to Ryan to cover some key statistics and to share their story. Thanks, Ryan. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Candace, and thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm sorry that you've had to experience bi erasure and biphobia firsthand in such a way. When we talk about bisexuality, we also have to talk about intersectionality, and it's really important that we think about how intersectionality plays into what being bi is really like. And you can see on the page here, 40% of people of color that identify in the LGBTQ plus community identify as bi. And about 50% of trans people describe their sexual orientation as bi or queer. I'm a gender fluid person and I'm bi. My experience is because of the intersections of those identities or those pieces of me makes my experience of bisexuality very different from Candace's or Matt's or Laura's. And I am also white. So those three intersections make my experiences privileged and even more different than folks who may be bi and people of color, or trans and bi and people of color. And it's important to consider those things as we look at the statistics on the next slide. So there's a lot of information on this page, right? There's a ton of stuff going on, and I invite you to read through all of these things as I'm going to talk through some of them. But some of the things that stand out for me: bisexuals and bi plus individuals, so those that we're putting under the bi plus umbrella, may identify as queer, fluid, pansexual, omnisexual, to name a few. There are many more unique non-monosexual labels out there, and we're talking about all of those here. So we are inclusive of those identities. Bisexuals and bi plus people make up the largest portion of the LGBTQ community. And yet we're often referred to as the silent B. And the reason for that is because 28% of bi people are able to say, only 28% of bi people are able to say that they are out to the most important people in their life, versus 77% of gay men and 71% of lesbians. The other things that stand out for me around victimization of the bi plus community, especially bi plus women, and around mental health: sadness, hopelessness, depression, suicidal ideation, and attempts. It's really important when we think about these things, and the statistics that are just on the page right now, it's so important for us to step back and think about the systemic and systematic ways in which our society in the US and globally impact how these statistics show up. Because this is not about bi plus individuals being victims. Our identity is not victimization. Our identity is strength and resilience and openness. But the way in which our communities have set us up has been mostly for failure and not success. And we need to work to change that. So I would invite you in the chat. I see quite a few folks sharing already. Please jump in the chat. We'd love to hear your thoughts at this point. And we'll call out a few of them. And I see Jesse Thatcher. Thank you for your question. How do these percentages compare to cisgender and or white LGBTQ plus community members? There are a few statistics on the screen, and actually, Candace, I think we just lost the deck.
I am working to repair that. Everybody,
Thank you.
Welcome to 2020. So give me a minute.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you all for your patience, especially
so
as we're the first one of the first sessions here of Summit. Appreciate your patience. The statistics that were on the slide are inclusive of all races, ethnicities, as long as they identify within the bi plus community. So really, we don't have individual statistics for white or cisgender LGBTQ plus people. There are a few things called out here, but there's a number of resources in terms of the Trevor Project recently released their mental health survey for LGBTQ youth, and there's a good amount of information on bi plus individuals there. For individuals who are 13 to 24 years old, I think it is. And there's a number of resources from Out and Equal, Bisexual Organizing Project, things like that, that may call out some more specific disparities in impact between different ethnicities. Let's see, and let's see what else we've got going on in the chat. Thank you all for your wonderful participation.
You know, Ryan, one of the things that strikes me about the statistics is the feelings of sad or hopelessness, 66%. And that's something I can relate to. While I unfortunately can't consider myself a youth anymore, I still remember how this shift of sad and hopelessness to coming out and how much that changed for me when I finally was able to love myself and own who I am.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing, Laura. And I'm going to share a little bit more about my story here in a second. But yes, mental health struggles are definitely something that I've experienced as well. I have major depressive disorder. I have generalized anxiety disorder. I live with suicidal ideation, and I have attempted that, not for quite a while, but I have. And it's directly related to the amount or lack of support that I received for my identities. So Candace, let's flip to the next slide and I'll dive into that a little bit more. So I grew up in suburban Wisconsin, just outside of Milwaukee. And I knew that I was different. It's hard not to when you grow up in a predominantly upper middle class white suburb and you do not fit the masculine mold. It is very obvious it was very obvious to me from a very early age that I was different and that wasn't acceptable. In terms of gender identity and expression, I realized at about 3 years old, my first memory at this point in my life, where I remember being shamed for playing with whatever toys I felt like with some of my friends because they were typically associated with girls. I also played with toys that were typically associated with boys, and I did team sports and things. I was a gymnast, I played volleyball, I was a tennis player. So all of those things are kind of ambiguous in how we think about them in gender roles. And those things were not received very well and sometimes outright shamed. I certainly didn't have anyone telling me about them. Didn't have anyone telling me about the language of transgender, about non-binary, about bisexuality. I realized when I was in my teenage years that I was attracted to multiple genders. And again, there was no support. There was no language. And there weren't that many visible icons either. You know, in 2020, thankfully, we do have quite a few out by individuals in media. But back at the time in the 90s and early aughts, there still weren't that many. And that does a lot of damage. And it has done a lot of damage as a result of not having that language to understand myself, as a result of not seeing anyone like me. I never really expected to live past 15, 20, 30, and I tried to help myself down that path a few times. I still struggle with the damage that did. It's not a one and done. When you come out, it doesn't magically solve everything else. It doesn't remove the internalized biphobia. It doesn't remove the internalized self-hatred that comes with growing up in these types of environments with a lack of support for who we are. I still deal with that every day. Suicidal ideation is a major part of my day-to-day life, even now. I know better. I don't act on that, but it's there. But I fight back. At 32, I'm out to everyone in my life. I'm visible. I'm a proud gender fluid and bi plus person. And frankly, that has been well received by Wells Fargo and the people that I have had the pleasure of working with. It's been pretty well received by my friends. But as of a month ago, I no longer have a relationship with my family because of who I am. And that is still really damaging. And it's something that we need to think about when we talk about intersectionality with the bi plus community, and frankly, just for folks who are bisexual or pansexual or omnisexual, or whatever non-monosexual identity that or label that folks choose. The damage is not over just because we come out. As we heard in the opening plenary, we often have to come out every single day of our lives to new people, because otherwise people will just think we're other, we're weird, we're different. And so keep those things in mind as we proceed through the rest of our discussion today and our panel later on in this session. Now I'll turn it over to Matt to share a little bit about their story.
Thank you, Ryan, for sharing that personal, very inspiring, very meaningful and emotional story. Just love you for it. As we get into this, and I'll share just a minute, but we are also noticing a number of comments and questions come through on the chat. We'll try to get to those as we get to our Q&A at the end. So with that, I will get into my own personal experience. And as Ryan shared, and as we were planning for the session today, Ryan and I realized that we're from near the same area. They grew up just outside of Milwaukee, and I currently live there. So while our locations cross paths and our experiences are very different. If you knew me well, you'd know I'm generally an always smiling, always positive kind of person, appallingly optimistic individual with a properly resilient attitude. And I have quite a few wonderful people in my life, and that's been extremely important for me. I came out later in life, and doing so helped me be more real, to live my own life with integrity to myself. And in that, I think about this for a moment. Actually, if you think about this for a moment, I grew up in a middle-class home, loving parents, strong and supportive family in Kenosha, Wisconsin. I graduated from high school with lots of friends, went to college, achieved both an undergraduate degree, a master's degree, worked hard at a number of early part-time jobs and volunteer activities at local hospitals. And that taught me a lot about life, work, and people. During the master's program, though, I met a beautiful woman, the other half of my soul, and we've known each other now 28 years. We've been married for 26. I'm 52. That's over half my life, right? So I've got this great career so far in financial services, 3 grown kids who I have great relationships with, and it's just been great. It's just I think about that image that I just painted for a moment and what that brings to mind. It sounds like I've checked every traditionally expected box in my life, and my life looks perfect. Nailed it, right? At the same time, however, something was different, but I didn't recognize it right away, and it took some time to do so. My brother and I are survivors of abuse by caregivers, actually, not immediate family, no involvement there. And I kind of hesitate to tell that part. It's a bit depressing, clearly, but it impacts, that information impacts more than me, which is a theme through the rest of this, actually. But it's relevant today to explain why it took me a while to understand that my sexual orientation is not a product of my early experience. I'm bisexual by birth. It's just that I had this unfortunate complication that delayed self-awareness a bit, and to see the man standing behind the tragedy and who I was, and accepting that in myself. Now, it took an extremely long time for me to understand that. What I was feeling was okay, and honestly ignored it for the longest time. You tell the younger me. Was I bisexual by birth, or did a reasonably intelligent mind find a label that provided some measure of comfort? And so over time, though, I came to realize that the former was true with help, and I admitted to myself that I am bisexual. I actually looked at myself in the mirror and said it out loud. And when I did, it felt like someone pulled a really large, heavy weight off my back. I felt like I was standing taller, feeling stronger, all of that. In a single moment, I felt better. And I felt like a whole big piece of my self-understanding kind of fell into place at that moment. Now, though, I had a challenge, though, at the moment, though. By the time I got to that point in my life, remember what I just said, I'm married. I've got 3 kids. I'm working at Northwestern Mutual. My biggest fear is the law of physics, right? For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. I could gain myself in self-understanding, but conceivably lose everything else in the process. But my wife's reaction was the highest form of love, extreme support, and a show of strength I would wager not everyone has. If I could live my life again, however, I would absolutely give her a slightly longer runway to deal with that one. I mean, I've surprised her with some stuff before, but that one was a doozy, right? So she shouldn't have had to, that long into our marriage, deal with this at the same time I did, right? And that's one thing if I could change, I would. But that's just it. My biggest fears from this have always been my family. As a married man, when I talk about these things, it's not just me, right? I'm not the only one impacted in everything I do. I'm not the only one who has to deal with everything I say about these things. And so I came out in my 40s at work, and the ERG, the people we had running that at the time, were extremely supportive. That's where I started, right? When I first came out was at work because it was easier. Northwestern and the folks, the folks there, they, and at Northwestern, I have people who work at Northwestern Mutual whose kids go to school with mine. And for the record, though, those people are wonderful people. They're great, absolutely top quality humans. But it didn't stop that irrational fear that my coming out would cause my kids problems in school. This person tells this person, tells this person, tells that person. The next thing you know, my kids are catching flack in high school. And so and I was terribly afraid of that. Like I said, it was irrational. The people that I know are wonderful, but you don't want your family to pay a price for the things that we do, and that's just that would have been unfortunate. That said, there have been some folks who don't understand bisexuality, and to be fair, as a bisexual man, if I walk into a room and I say it, given everything I just told you about who I am and the image that comes with me, I walk into a room and I say that, and I guarantee you that a third of the room won't believe me. A third of the room will think I have an open relationship with my wife, and the rest of them will think I'm gay and just haven't admitted it. But no, that's not it. But my family gets caught in the middle with this. If you think about it, my life is a case study in bi erasure and biphobia. If I don't say anything about who I am, you'd never think it. The married guy with a loving wife and 3 great kids is what? And unfortunately, the revelation to others that I'm bisexual is usually followed by some inappropriate questions. And the big challenge that I have with that is it's a family thing. It's not just me that have gotten those questions. It happens to my wife as well, and that's extremely maddening, right? That said, I do recognize my privilege as a bisexual male. Bisexual women have it much harder on that front, where the bias towards me is I'm gay and I should just admit it. The bias toward bi women is an over-sexualization of who they are. The assumption that if you're bi, then this also must be true. It's wrong, right? And being an individual and bi is no different than being an individual and heterosexual. Who you are as an individual person is different than what you are in orientation and expression. And I'll just share one last quick story. My lasting memory of coming out, like I said, my wife and I have been married for 26 years. On our 20th wedding anniversary, we decided to go to wine country in California in June. And it was Pride. We went to the Pride Parade for my 20th wedding anniversary, and to watch my wife stand there cheering at the top of her lungs, waving rainbow flags, was an image I'll never forget. So she's the strongest person I know.
We love you, Matt.
So thank you. So next slide, please. Okay, so you've heard some of the personal stories of our panelists and begin a little bit to get a sense for the challenges that bi+ people face. Let's dig in a little deeper into those key topics for today, bi erasure and biphobia, and let's define them for everyone. We'll come up here in a moment. Thank you. There's an acknowledgement that bi people face more stress because of what researchers call double discrimination, and that's that impact felt from both queer and non-queer communities. In addition to a lack of robust and coherent sense of connectedness among bisexuals as a group, bi erasure is one of the biggest problems we face from others. You can't tell what our sexuality is based on the gender of our partners, and we're judged to an extent on what that picture looks like, as in my case. Others then question it or don't acknowledge it at all. Biphobia, on the other hand, refers to the fear, hatred, or intolerance of bisexual folks that we experience from others, and it's a term used to describe an aversion felt toward who we are as a group and our orientation as individuals. There are many people who are biphobic and carry those negative attitudes with them through common thoughts being, there's no such thing, it's not possible, and many others, which you'll hear about now from my colleague, Laura Martin.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you for sharing your story. Thanks to all the panelists for sharing their stories so far. So now that we've learned a little bit about the definition of bi erasure and biphobia, let's look at how it plays out in the world. Some of the examples are when you see if you see somebody partnered with a member of the opposite sex, assuming that that partner is heterosexual, that plays into the idea of heteronormativity, which is the idea that to be heterosexual is to be normal. That's it's a huge way to erase bisexuals completely. One of the other things is, assuming that everyone who is bisexual is promiscuous. As we heard earlier, a lot of us come out at work and it's a safe place for us. And that was one of the first places that I came out. And shortly after I came out, and by shortly, I mean within days of me coming out, somebody who was my superior and a male came up to me and leaned in and quietly asked if that meant I was into threesomes. And this was at work during the day when a male superior came and asked me that question. I was completely uncomfortable. I was embarrassed. I was ashamed of who I was. I was angry that somebody would ask me that who doesn't even know me, from Adam. And it was really, really painful. Next slide, please. One of the things, next slide, please, Candace. Oh, well, I think we're frozen at the moment, so I'm just going to keep going forward. There's a lot of really hurtful phrases and sayings that people do who don't understand bisexuality, the bi plus community. So you get a lot of comments like, it's just a phase. You're just too scared to come out as lesbian, aren't you? So do you and your partners have threesomes? But which do you like more? So you just got married to a man. Does that mean that you're not bisexual anymore? Isn't your partner afraid you're going to cheat? Bisexuality doesn't exist. It's just a step before coming out as a lesbian. So you just sleep with anyone. You're confused. You will have to choose eventually. I grew up knowing something was different about me, but I really didn't have the words to describe what I was feeling. I grew up in the suburbs of Milwaukee in a very loving home. My parents did the best they could with what they had. I also, like Matt, am a survivor. And so as I was growing up, I had a tremendous amount of shame because, as I said, from the time I was little, I knew I had an attraction to both men and women. I just didn't know, I didn't have words to describe that, to put language to that. And so I stayed in the closet. I didn't know what to do. I just shamed myself and kept feeling horrible. Fast forward a number of years, I was dating a woman. I was still closeted. She was not. And I slowly started realizing the troubles that this was causing in our relationship because I was closeted, but I was so afraid to do anything, to say anything. So I slowly started coming out to people at work. And as I began, the very first person that I came out to was my good friend Ryan, and I literally leaned in and said, "I'm the bee." I whispered it. I couldn't even say it. I could not say it out loud. From Ryan, the snowball kept growing, and I started coming out to more and more people at work that I felt safe with. I was fortunate enough to go to Out and Equal 4 years ago. And Lance Bass was also there from NSYNC, and he was one of the keynote speakers from one of the plenaries. And he got up there and shared how painful it was to be in NSYNC and to be closeted, and how he swore to himself that visibility was going to be really important to him now. He was going to talk about it and share the story to help others. And I sat there crying because I knew if I wanted to be free, that's what I had to do. I had to be just like Lance Bass. So I decided right then and there to make the decision to come out. I went up to the room and called my father, who had been questioning and wondering, why did I care so much about this stuff? What was I doing in Florida at this conference? What was I doing? And I called my dad and told him why I cared so much, and that I was bisexual, and that I was dying on the inside, and if I wanted to be healthy, I needed to come out. And he begged me not to. He said I would ruin my career if I came out. I will share that my father, fast forward a couple of years, now goes every year to the LGBT Community Center fundraiser that they have. So it's come full circle. So there is hope. Don't give up on those in your life. There is hope. Anyhow, I came home from Out and Equal, and I decided to come out everywhere. And I came out with my friends, and I came out on social media, and I came out on our work social media. Like many of us have talked about, I have to come out over and over again, especially now that I'm in a straight passing relationship. I am really, really grateful for those that came before me who had the courage and the strength to be visible. I have made it a personal vow in my own life to do everything I can to increase visibility so that others hopefully don't have to suffer as much and can learn to love themselves a little bit sooner than I was. I was in my 40s before it took hold. So I'm really, really grateful to have been given the opportunity to share here today. We've told you the definition of bisexual that too, bi erasure and biphobia. And I'd just like to know a little bit about you. What have you experienced, or what have you, maybe as Noreen shared so bravely, seeing the photo of the couple in the very beginning and wondering if that was a lesbian couple and realizing, oh wait, this could be a bisexual couple. It's you know, we all have moments like that. We would love to hear from you.
Hi, Laura, it's Noreen. I thought I'd just share a few of the things that we're seeing here in the chat. A lot of folks who are identifying with what's been being shared, and so much appreciation for the story, and a lot of folks who are relating to what's being shared here. Thank you all. We had some new messages.
Wonderful.
I have something I'll share, Laura, just while we're waiting for folks to come in. And again, also thank you to Ryan for taking over sharing. 2020 seems to just be embodying itself into my Zoom connection here. So yes, appreciate you, Ryan. So I think for me, so I too have been asked really quickly upon meeting people if I like to have threesomes, and I don't have anything against folks that do. There are a lot of folks in the Bi+ community that are in multi-union relationships, and we have a big umbrella. We welcome you. But I do think that it is an over-sexualization specifically of female presenting folks that we get asked that question. And I don't think people that are on the masculine spectrum probably get asked that as often as we do. And so I know I saw a comment earlier about the over-sexualization of women. And I think that that certainly has played out, and many Bi+ folks can feel that way. So just wanted to call that out. You're not alone, friend.
Thank you, Candace. I'm not seeing a question come in, so maybe about this in particular. So maybe we can move forward and then we will come back with more questions at the end.
Absolutely. Thank you all for sharing your stories and experiences in the chat.
So I will take it from here. So again, yes, also thank you, Laura, and thanks to everyone who shared. So the stories and statistics that we have shared with you are really personal to us, but they are felt by many in our community, and they've also been felt for a really long time. These impacts are summed up quite eloquently in a March 2011 publication from the San Francisco Human Rights Commission titled Bisexual Invisibility, Impacts and Recommendations. And they say, bisexuals experience high rates of being ignored, discriminated against, demonized, or rendered invisible by both the heterosexual world and the lesbian and gay communities. Often the entire sexual orientation is branded as invalid, immoral, or irrelevant. They continue, despite years of activism and the largest population within the LGBT community, the needs of bisexuals still go unaddressed, and their very existence is still called into question. This erasure has serious consequences on bisexual health, economic well-being, and funding for bi organizations and programs. I share this with you because as leaders, members, and allies of the LGBTQ community, it's up to all of us in this meeting today to help to turn this around. In the words of Maya Angelou, once you know better, do better. So let's talk about how we can do that. You can go to the next slide, Ryan. Thank you. So hopefully after hearing this presentation and the experiences of those of us in the community and our needs for support, you're ready to lean in and declare your allyship in the effort to end bi erasure and biphobia. Being an ally is easy, and the more you participate, the easier it becomes. And remember, justice and righteousness are on your side. Allyship, just like all other acts of love, is contagious. And the more we speak out and celebrate diverse communities, the more the world becomes a better place for everyone. So the first step is to believe that bi+ people exist. It's not just a step to becoming gay or lesbian. It's not just a phase. Accept bi+ identities without reservation and without trying to convince them otherwise. Trust bi+ people to know who they are attracted to, just as you are well aware of your own attractions without any need for debate or discussion. Speak out against biphobia and bi-erasure while also meeting people where they are. As we all have learned, rather painfully at times, we cannot force other people into allyship, but we can continue to educate and share our stories in the effort to build compassion and empathy, which leads to allyship. Celebrate bi+ culture and identities, particularly on social media, to expand your allyship reach. I also encourage all of you on here today to put bi+ Visibility Day on your calendars right now. It's September 23rd. It has been celebrated worldwide since 1999 and is a day to celebrate the accomplishments and the challenges of the bi+ community. And most of all, be sure that you tailor your allyship for the individuals that you support, as those needs might be different depending on their own unique experiences. The best way to determine how you can be the best ally is to simply ask. Now I'll pass it to Noreen to share her story, and then we'll kick off the panel moderation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Candace, so much. And I'm having a little technical issue here where my Zoom will shut down if I share the video, it appears. So you all have me audibly only. My apologies for that. But again, thank you, Candace, and all of the panelists for sharing your stories and your experience. So powerful. While I note here that I'm a fierce ally to my son, Ryan, I'm really a fierce ally to the full LGBTQ community and all diverse groups. I deeply despise exclusivity and have a deep need for all people to feel a sense of inclusion and connectivity. My son Ryan's coming out story was most unique for many queer people. He came home from school when he was in junior high, when I was working from home, and just said, almost in passing, "Hey, Mom, so all my friends already know about this, and I thought you should know too. Just want you to know I'm gay," which I responded, "Oh, well, that's good to know. Thank you for sharing that with me. And do you want to talk about it?" And he said, "No, I just wanted you to know." And I said, "Okay, well, just know I'll always be here for you if and when you do want to talk about it." And then we moved on with our days. Fast forward 2 years, and Ryan came home from school this time saying, "Hey, Mom, remember when I told you I was gay? Well, I've been thinking about it more, and I'm actually bi, and I consider myself pan because I feel attraction to all gender identities." And once again, my response was, "How wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with me, Ryan. I love you and will always be here for you when you want to talk." I know Ryan felt comfortable sharing his identity with me as he learned more about himself, because he trusts my unconditional love for him as a human being, regardless of his identification. I love him for being his full, authentic, big-hearted, cat-loving, nerdy self. I wish that all queer people experience the same unconditional love and acceptance from their families. And for those of you who didn't have the same experience, I'm sending all of you a big virtual mama bear hug. I see you, I believe in you, and I support you. We will now move into some questions for our panelists, and we certainly invite you to join in the chat. I wanted to jump in really quickly because I'm seeing quite a few questions about how we can create more bi+ inclusive programming within our ERGs. And Matt, I know you have something to share on this as well, but I wanted to share a little bit about Wells Fargo's journey in this space and how we came to this place. And it really started with Ryan's story, my son Ryan's story. Because when I learned of Ryan's bi+ identity, as a good ally mom, I did the work and I researched the experience of bi+ individuals so I could better understand the potential challenges he might face in the future, As I learned more, I recognized the lack of BI+ specific programming that we had within Wells Fargo's Pride ERG, and I became determined to support a safe and inclusive space for BI+ leaders and members within Pride, advocating for intentional inclusion with the happy outcome of our Wells Fargo Pride ERG prioritizing intentional BI+ inclusion throughout 2020, and it will continue to be a priority for 2021. So what does intentional inclusion look like? And how did we determine the need for it? Quite simply, it began with asking questions and listening, and more listening, and even more listening, because that's what allies do. The BI+ Coalition was formed through a simple invitation to join in our monthly ERG newsletter, and the group quickly grew. The BI+ Coalition is a diverse group of volunteer BI+ identifying leaders coming together to share their experiences within their identity in the effort to determine how to best advocate for this community. Many of the individuals in this group had not interacted with other BI+ folks previously. Let's just pause and process that for a moment. Most of the individuals in this advisory committee had never met another person who shared their identity. Sadly, the lack of the visibility for the BI+ community is closely tied with fears of biphobia and bi erasure, the very issues we've been discussing. And fortunately, in building the BI+ Coalition, we were able to create community for this identity group within Wells Fargo, while also validating their shared experience with biphobia and bi erasure, which was huge for the members. So often individual stories would be shared and the members would be amazed at how similar their experiences were, which was incredibly reaffirming for this group. Using the feedback gathered from the BI+ Coalition and further research that was done, collected content from external partners such as HRC, Trevor Project, and GLAD, and through that, we were able to create a business case for intentional inclusion of BI+ people, seeking greater visibility and BI+ focused programming within our ERG. As an initial step forward, we first educated our Pride ERG's enterprise and chapter leaders on the experience of BI+ people in a series of educational presentations, both domestically and internationally, culminating in a webinar just last week on International Day of BI+ Visibility to over 500 attendees in the effort to educate our members and other D&I leaders. The webinar was recorded and will be available as a resource on our ERG's media page indefinitely. Following the webinar, we engaged BI+ folks and their allies in our internal social media site for a conversation to discuss the content that was shared in the presentation and have further discussion around the identity and opportunities to better support this group. Additionally, each of our Pride ERG chapters will be producing annual events in support of the BI+ community within Wells Fargo, both throughout 2020 and 2021. This is what intentional inclusion looks like, providing education around the BI+ identity in the effort to build allyship, providing ways to engage and interact both with and within the community, and continuing the message of inclusivity year after year. By having this really visible programming, we are intentionally creating a safe space for BI+ leaders and other members to come out. So please consider your own ERG programming. Is it primarily focused on the L, the G, and the T? And to that we ask, what about the B? And we encourage you to consider more intentionally inclusive programming for the BI+ community as well. And before we move on to further Q&A, Matt, can you speak a little bit more about the inclusive programming within Northwestern?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have done some very similar things. One of our primary strategies going through 2020 into 2021 as we've grown is to increase that education and the focus on deeper education around the broader affinities of the LGBTQ community, bisexuality included. And we're hoping to continue that and expand that into the coming year for our ERG's members and real allies and anyone really. We have, not dissimilar to some of our conversations around this, we've conducted things like panel discussions, not unlike the one that we're doing today. The most recent one, obviously, was on bisexuality, as timing would have it. We have shared educational resources and started a group on our internal communications platform for Bi+ people as well, and that's growing. One thing we haven't fully explored, it's maybe just two things I think that would be really additive to what Noreen has shared, is a link or connections possibly to the community itself. And so we know of at least one local Bi+ community group trying to get up and running. And the idea there is, can a connection between the two, even if it's a social one, create a positive identity for Northwestern in that community, and kind of raise the, for lack of a better term, raise the brand awareness of NM within our own group, with a younger generation in particular, if we can. We started also talking about things like mentoring relationships, coming out support if somebody, mentoring relationships and possibly coming out support if somebody's looking for an ear of experience to rely on. What about, what's next, what if, how does this work? Those types of things, and then really kind of leaning into intersectionality as a topic of focus going forward as well. So a lot of great things we have planned that have been done so far, and in most recent memory, obviously through 2020, that we're planning on extending and expanding through 2021. That, like I said, very similar. Lots of education, lots of facilitating connections between people where we can to provide the best environment that we could possibly create for people. So
Excellent. Thank you so much, Matt. And we wanted to call out for sure. I mentioned in my story that my son belongs to Gen Z, and we know that this is an incredible generation of individuals coming forward, and it's a much more fluid generation, and from an identity perspective, both in terms of gender identity and sexual orientation. And I think we all need to, when we look at the business of diversity, be that much more aware of the fluidity of this incoming generation, and make sure that we really create inclusive spaces for these individuals coming in. So I thank you so much for that, Matt. And just, I didn't know if anyone else on the panel wanted to speak to that, about the fluidity of Gen Z, or how we can best support this group of individuals coming up. All right. And I didn't know, Ryan, or we may have lost Candace. I can't tell.
I am back. My internet. Great. I don't know what's happening, but actually I wanted to speak up about Gen Z.
Great.
Because I think it's important as organizations and as leaders within our companies that we really take a hard look at ourselves. And if we do not change our programming, if we do not acknowledge that the generation that's coming into the workforce is not statistically more diverse, both in terms of gender identity and sexual orientation, that we're not going to survive as companies the same way we do today. And so I would encourage everyone to, continue to share best practices with each other, but it's really important that we educate our existing generations in the workforce about what's coming with the new generation, because once they're already here, they're already joining our companies today. So the time is now. The time's really yesterday too, but the time is now. And so if there is anything that you've learned from here, or we can share any information with you to help you with your company have some of these discussions, please do certainly reach out, because that's going to help, I think, prepare us for success as we're moving forward.
Yeah, that's a really good call out, Candace. And a couple things. One, our contact information is in the deck, our email addresses that you should be able to access in Pathable in the PowerPoint. So please feel free to reach out to us. Second, obviously at Wells Fargo, we have to have some work to do in this space. And so it's really important for us as a company and for all of us to recognize exactly what Candace is saying. It's not just about LGBTQ identities, it's about diversity in every way. Gen Z is going to come into the workplace and they're going to expect that we've got this all figured out, that they're going to come to work and their goal, as it should be, is to work. That they're not going to want to have to constantly share their identity or fight for a seat at the table or equal representation or equal voice. And so it's important for all of us on this call today, all of us at Summit, to make that space and to do what we need to do at our respective companies, since we're all on different journeys and at different stages of those journeys. It's important that we all take these learnings away and really look at policies and the things that really drive our companies forward, and start to look at making those wholesale changes that may be needed at some of our companies to better address diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Because without that, all of our companies are going to lose out on talent to Gen Z, to places that are doing it well, that are creating that inclusive environment and creating that environment where they belong.
Thank you, Ryan. Moving on to another question. I'm curious, and this question really goes to Laura and then Matt. How are you received in your community, in your extended family, and at work? Are you able to live authentically in all aspects of your life? And please just speak a little bit about that experience. And we'll start with you, Laura.
Sure, thank you for asking, Noreen. For the most part, yes, I am able to live authentically. I've come out to all the people that I love and that are closest to me, including the people that I love from my work. And my community, you know, it's been a really wonderful journey. This year I have a big porch, and for Pride Month, I found a huge rainbow flag and a huge bi flag that I hung them both. I hung the rainbow flag and the bi flag. And it was a good opportunity. My neighborhood is very friendly. There's a lot of people outside a lot. So I got 3 questions about what the other flag was. You know, they all knew what the rainbow was, but they weren't sure what the other flag meant. And so it was a great opportunity for me to be myself and to be free and to be authentic and to help create more awareness.
Thanks, Laura. And
Yes. So as I said, ironically, I felt comfortable, more comfortable coming out at work than I did in my personal life. And Northwestern, the reason for that is, again, Northwestern Mutual has a robust, thoughtful strategy for D&I, as well as visible and very strong support from senior leadership in both our ERGs and our diversity councils. And so with that, when I came out, the leaders of our ERG were there for me, gave me the support I could have hoped for, as were our business leaders. On a personal note, it was much harder. Again, I said my family gets caught in the middle. And so I do like to joke that it's easier to hide in plain sight if nobody knows everything about you, right? And so, but I've started to change that because, you know, holding everybody at arm's length is not a good way to live. And I've been told that I excel at changing the subject. So, right. So I came out to personal friends 1 year shortly before July 4th, and started to bring those you know, kind of worlds closer together. And for the 4th of July, a number of families were getting together for the day, watch some fireworks, you know, the whole like celebrate the day from noon on, right? And when we arrived, you couldn't miss the people that we were there to meet. It was rainbow umbrellas, rainbow, you know, towels, rainbows, just everywhere. It was the coolest thing ever to see friends that you didn't think that were going to take this well, kind of went, you know, kind of ran full head at it, and that was pretty nice. And so the personal courage I found in doing that paid off as I started to bring those, like I said, kind of pull those walls down between groups. And I guess at the end of the day, it's a little bit of know your audience as you go to do that, at least to the degree that you can. But then, like I said, in my case, as I started to come out to personal friends, I've gotten a lot more support than I was actually expecting. So it's been a very positive experience for me.
Excellent, excellent. I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you, Matt. I want to jump to some of the questions that we're seeing here in the chat. I'm seeing quite a few folks sharing about they also get the inappropriate questions. And I'd like to ask the panelists, what do you feel, what's been your best strategy in shutting those questions down? And
I'm going to go.
Becca, please jump in.
Can I please? I love
Please.
sarcasm. I think sarcasm is a great way to talk back to inappropriate questions. So I'm like, oh, you certainly think you know me well now, don't ya? And then I just move on. But in all seriousness, I've also...
Oh, sure.
I think we may have lost Candace. We may have lost Candace.
So I can
so yeah, please jump in, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we wait for Candace to come back. And thanks all for your patience on the connections we're struggling with a little bit today. Honestly, I think it's, for me, it's one of the same things that comes up or that I've heard from people who experience sexual assault or, you know, really inappropriate jokes and things like that. It's asking them what they mean by that. Playing kind of dumb, but making them explain it. Because then all of a sudden they have to sit with that and actually spell out exactly what they mean to learn from you. And all of a sudden that makes them super uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because it's obviously really freaking inappropriate. And all of a sudden when they actually have to step into what they just said, it's, they don't appreciate that.
It's like inappropriate jokes when you stop to say, "Why? I'm sorry. What? Why was that? What was that? Why was that funny?" Right?
Exactly.
Just putting it back on them to answer the question. But I think there were a couple more comments. Matt, did you have something else to say?
No, I was just going to say that works brilliantly, and I think Candace was going to say the same thing. That just works brilliantly because, you know, the average human, when they get into that may be a thing they rip off as a question to you, but when you turn that back on them and then they have to explain it in the words you know they're going to have to explain it in, it stops the conversation and it's just amazing how quickly that comes to an end at that point.
Yeah. So does simply saying ouch. That has worked for me, but I've got to be fairly comfortable with the person to be able to say ouch so they know to ask more about why, maybe a comment about, you know, an inappropriate comment about promiscuity is not okay.
I think it's important to call out too that, again, there are some people in the BI+ community that have multi-union relationships, and that's entirely fine. And we welcome them in our community. And it doesn't mean you're promiscuous at all. What people do in their own bedrooms is completely up to them with whoever they're doing it with, as long as it's with adults. I mean, that's none of our business. But I think assuming that we all are in multi-union relationships is not a good assumption. So I just want to call that out, that we love and respect our folks in the BI+ community that have multi-union relationships. That's awesome. I personally have a hard time handling one person. I can't imagine handling 2 or 3 people in a relationship. I just am not that strong. So props to everyone else. But I think we do need to be mindful of the assumptions that we make about people. And I agree with Ryan that having them, having them explain it is a really great way to take back control of the conversation when it's inappropriate.
I like the other thing that we shared earlier, I think in Candace, when you were speaking, where you say, let's trust BI+ individuals to know who they're attracted to, just as we know who we as individuals are attracted to. And this reminds me of a conversation that I had with my dad when he was struggling to understand Ryan's identity, and we were trying to have a really open conversation about it. And my dad kept saying some of those same things, like, but which gender do you find yourself more attracted to? As though we are attracted to genders as opposed to individuals. And I kept saying to my dad, who was very, very proud of his own sexuality growing up, like, when you were 5, when you were 10, when you were 13, when you were in high school, did you ever have any question of your own identity? Did anyone ever question your heterosexuality? Did anyone ever suggest, oh, no, you don't know who you're attracted to. You're not really attracted to women. You're attracted to men. And if not, what makes you think that you have the right to ask those questions of others? And furthermore, why do you think that you understand another person's attractions better than they might understand it themselves? So yes, I'm sorry, I could go up on a while on. So my supportive stories is the mama bear there.
You are the best ally mom, an ally parent in general. So
just trying,
Love it.
and learning and growing and improving as I go on a daily basis. But thank you. There are a lot of great comments here in the chats, and I really appreciate all the feedback. And I want to see if there are other questions that I have missed there. I'm seeing, I find it much easier to defend the identities of others, but feel uncomfortable defending my own, I guess. I think we can all understand that. And that's the importance of allyship, and why this community needs the allyship from the broader support groups around them, regardless of their identities, right? Let's all speak up and support. Let's see. Glad to see some other comments about the importance of asking others to clarify their meanings or intentions when inappropriate questions are raised. That's great. Let's see. I'm gonna jump into another, oh, no, go ahead, please.
Sorry, yeah, Michael, thanks for the question. So the question was, would it be fair to say that having the language to understand myself earlier on, if it would have prevented the damage or just made it a little bit directionally better? A little bit of both. You know, I think on occasion I'd compare it to having an illness or other condition that's hard to diagnose, and there's some relief and there's some comfort when you finally know what it is and know what you're dealing with. So I think it would have changed a little bit of the trajectory for me. I at least would have been confident in myself and known who I am. Given where I was as a child in Franklin, Wisconsin, I don't think it would have really changed how I was received. So there still would have been harm from that. But there's a lot of power in language, and not just in the way we're talking about it here. But within that, there is so much power in understanding who we are and being able to identify ourselves and label ourselves as we choose to. And I think that actually speaks to some of the other comments and questions. You know, when we talk about the nuance or the differences between bi plus, pansexual, omnisexual, all of these things are really deeply personal choices. You know, if you want to get into queer theory and sexuality studies, you know, there are some differences, but the important thing is that people, just like pronouns, for example, people have done a lot of work to get to the point where they feel like they can share how they identify with you and share their label. And so it's important to cherish that and to recognize them for doing that work. And even if, you know, you or me or we don't particularly understand some of the nuance, it's important that we do not that we don't put people down or delegitimize how they're identifying just because it sounds like another identity that we do know, right? It's important to hold people's truths as sacred and let them share their experiences genuinely and as they want to.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm seeing some more questions in the chat, and one of the questions that has come up is that how we can all be better allies to the community. And we gave some pretty clear clear statements. I would say that the listening part was a great one. I think it's critical for all allies, but I also want to ask the panelists, because this was also some of the other questions that have come up along the path is you know, how can we ask questions? How can we ask questions if we're being sincere in a positive way? And I saw some responses there from Ryan and others in the chat too. So I would say, panelists, what's most important to each of you from your allies?
If I could, honestly, for me, and I think of it as inclusion, right? And to me, I think inclusion looks and feels a bit like a hug, right?
Yes.
A safe environment is an empathetic one. You can characterize that by open-mindedness, a willingness to learn about things which may be unfamiliar, a place where prejudgments and assumptions about people are minimized, and otherwise kind of lean into just getting to know people for who they are, and being there for them in that way, and be present, visibly supportive, overall, and really just the value of that connection, and understand how much meaning, I think Ryan said it earlier, the meaning and the value and the impact of the words that we use and what they have on people, and how just a set of open arms can be meaningful to so many. So,
Thanks, Matt. Sincerity is truly key. Laura, did you have something to say to that?
Sure. One of the things beyond listening that also really helps me is having friends that I can trust to speak up when I'm not present, to help keep the allyship going. So making sure that all the people that I'm really close to know and feel safe and feel like they have the language they need, so that if they're in a position, somebody just asked me the other day, a friend's husband asked what they could do. And I said, well, when you hear down through the grapevine that, Sarah's friend is bisexual, you can speak up and say something. So somebody isn't giving any negative connotations with that.
Thank you. Thank you. And Candace, I don't know, can we still hear
Yes,
you?
I'm here.
Yay.
So a note to anyone who's also presenting, even if you practice this 1,000 times and your internet never gives out, and you are the one that's encouraging people to buy internet extenders, you may be the one that fails your team on Go Day. So to everybody, what's the best way to be an ally? In addition to the fantastic things that have been shared already, I think helping us to combat our own self-erasure is really helpful. So folks that are really close to me know a lot of the things that I struggle with anxiety and depression and fears of commitment. And like, I'm a single person, I'm 35, I have no problems with that whatsoever, but it sometimes can be something that society can really push upon you. And you can have moments of weakness when you feel like, I'm not giving my mom her grandchildren, and whatever the case may be, right? We can have things that can come to us in moments of weakness. And I think when you become a close ally to somebody, you can be there, you can recognize that and help lift them up and give them strength, help sing their song when they forget the lyrics. I guess would be what I would say, is to really lean in and offer that empathy and that support, because we're just like everyone else. Our pool's just a little bit bigger, and still doesn't mean we want to swim in the pool, but the pool may be bigger. So to offer that kind of customized support, I think would be what I would want most from my allies, in addition, again, to the great things that have already been said.
Thank you, Candace. I want to echo a great comment, a series of comments actually that are coming up in the chat, but particularly what Ryan just noted. And they said, we need to stop battering folks in our own community. And I think that's so critically important, right? I mean, we know that the hetero folks are going to take a little while to get it, right? Because they're still trying to understand the broader community. And so we throw in the non-binary orientation into a binary world and a heteronormative world, and it's that much harder for the hetero folks to understand. But when we look at the broader LGBTQ community and we see the bi-erasure and biphobia that exists there, that is really a huge opportunity for this larger community to be accepting of all of the diversity that exists within the community. I really hope that through the stats and story sharing that we've had here today, that you can all see the negative impact that can come and the erasure that occurs, sadly, not only because of people who don't understand the identity, but it also happens within the identity itself, where folks are feeling like, I didn't feel queer enough to call myself a member of the community. I struggled because I felt like I wasn't authentic in saying I was a part of the community. And I think it's so important that everybody own who they are and feel the beauty and positivity of their individual selves. I'm seeing some more comments here about the importance of the community coming together and how our differences empower us, and I agree. What other thoughts would the panelists like to share? We're just coming up to a few more minutes left.
I think, Noreen, I want to echo what you've just shared and what I said in the chat. It's not just for bi+ individuals where we are experiencing that kind of brutalization within our own community. Heard a lot of stories from folks who feel like they're not gay enough or not lesbian enough, or they're not trans enough, maybe because they don't pass as they might wish to. But these things are used as mechanisms to divide us and put us down and brutalize us within our own community. And we get enough of that from outside. We've seen what the last 4 years have been like. We don't need to do that to ourselves from within our own community. We are better than that. We are often so full of care and love for each other, and we just need to take special care to make sure we're showing up for all parts of our communities, whether they are lesbian, gay, bisexual, pansexual, omnisexual, to name a few, trans, non-binary. We can't keep expecting that this is all going to be solved for us when on occasion or all too frequently we can't even be nice to each other.
Thanks, Ryan. And I think what we're all seeing in the chat is a lot of support for your words, a lot of agreement with your words. And I have to say, as a panelist, I'm humbled by the comments in the chat, and thank you so much for your very kind words. I'd like to just step back for a moment and applaud these 4 highly visible bi+ individuals who have come forward to share stories today. I have learned so much from this group, which has just furthered my allyship to the community and also my ability to support my son and my sister. I thank you all for your visibility, which is so important and not easy, but so critically important to those who follow in your footsteps and for others to learn from each of you. I also wanted to thank the audience for attending this session. There were a lot of great sessions at the same time, and I certainly look forward to watching the recorded sessions that we were up against. And with just a few minutes left, any closing words from the panelists?
Yeah,
just-
I would just say, pardon me, I'd just say to let us know if you didn't get your question answered here today, reach out to one of us or let us know, and we'll be happy to follow up where as we can for sure.
And I just want to thank everybody again for being here today to support us and to help create change. I also want to echo that those of you that are interested in the LinkedIn, who had asked about the LinkedIn group, can email one of us and we'll make sure to get you on the list.
And did we share the resources? I'm sorry, I lost connectivity momentarily.
No,
so I
you're
don't
just
know if
fine.
you- Great, thank you.
There is a slide at the end of what we were just sharing. So after our thank you slide, you can access it in Pathable in the files section for this session. There are a lot of resources there for BI+ individuals and allies. I really encourage everyone to jump in there and take a look at them when you have a chance. And I do want to echo what Matt said too. Please feel free to reach out to us through the Summit platform or via our email, which are also included in the deck. And really just a huge thank you to everyone that's participated so vibrantly and so prolifically in the chat, because this would not have been the same session without you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your session or your summit.
Absolutely.
Happy
Happy
Summit,
Summit.
y'all.
Happy Summit.
Summit.